The night she asked him was the kind of night that makes ordinary lives tilt without warning. Rain pressed against the bus stop glass in Columbus, Ohio, blurring the city into trembling streaks of light, and Matthew felt the quiet weight of another forgettable evening settle on his shoulders. Then he noticed her standing there, clutching a folded hospital brochure, eyes brave but exhausted, as if she had already run a long distance and was still being asked to keep going. In that fragile pause between strangers, something irreversible began. He would later realize that the question she carried toward him would rearrange his life in ways neither of them could imagine. Before the story goes any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that happen between imperfect people, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that are still searching. Matthew was not a man looking for romance. He worked long shifts as a delivery driver, lived in a small apartment with furniture that never quite matched, and kept his expectations modest because disappointment had taught him efficiency. His faith was real but worn, something he carried like an old coat, dependable yet frayed at the edges. He had learned to be helpful without being hopeful. That night, he was simply waiting for a bus home. Sarah, whose name he would learn much later, carried a different kind of tiredness. She had returned from a hospital visit where doctors spoke in careful sentences and family members avoided her eyes. Her mother's birthday dinner was approaching, and the pressure of showing up alone had become unbearable. Somewhere between grief and courage, she decided to ask a stranger for help. Not love, not forever, just a temporary shelter from judgment and pity. The arrangement began awkwardly, as all fragile things do. They agreed on boundaries without ever stating them, circling each other with politeness and disbelief. Matthew attended a family gathering in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, wearing a borrowed jacket and the practiced smile of someone pretending confidence. Sarah introduced him with a brightness that trembled, and he responded with steady kindness that surprised even himself. Her relatives watched closely, measuring his hands, his posture, his patience. He passed without realizing there had been a test. What Matthew did not know was how heavy the pretending weighed on Sarah. She lived with a chronic condition that made everyday tasks unpredictable, sometimes painful, sometimes humiliating. She had learned to smile through it, to laugh first so no one else could. The idea of being seen as desirable, even temporarily, was both thrilling and terrifying. Every moment with Matthew felt like standing on a bridge made of glass. Days turned into weeks, and the pretending grew complicated. Matthew found himself adjusting his schedule to walk her to appointments, learning the quiet rhythms of her energy, understanding when silence was better than reassurance. He noticed how she apologized too often, how she minimized her pain with humor, how she looked away when people stared. Without realizing it, he began to protect her, not as a boyfriend, not as a hero, but as a human being who refused to let another person feel small. The challenge was not the lie they told others, but the truth forming between them. Matthew struggled with guilt, wondering if kindness without commitment was its own kind of deception. His faith whispered questions about honesty and intention, about whether love could grow from something that started as an act. He prayed in his delivery truck during lunch breaks, asking for clarity, asking not to hurt someone who had trusted him with her vulnerability. Sarah, meanwhile, wrestled with fear. She had asked for pretending, but her heart did not understand contracts. She felt herself leaning into his presence, trusting his consistency, and that terrified her more than being alone. She had been abandoned before, not always by people leaving, but by people staying without truly seeing her. The thought of losing Matthew after the pretending ended felt like losing something she had never been allowed to keep. The turning point came on an ordinary afternoon that refused to stay ordinary. Matthew found Sarah sitting on the floor of her apartment, exhausted after a difficult day, the cheerful mask nowhere in sight. There were no dramatic gestures, no grand speeches. He simply sat beside her, listened without trying to fix anything, and stayed until the weight of the day loosened its grip. In that stillness, the pretending cracked, and something real breathed through. From then on, the world seemed to test them. Friends questioned motives. Family members offered warnings disguised as concern. Matthew faced his own doubts, wondering if love meant sacrifice he was unprepared to make. Sarah battled the old voice telling her she was asking for too much, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection life allowed her. Yet each time they pulled back, life pushed them closer with quiet insistence. They learned each other's flaws in unromantic ways. Matthew's tendency to withdraw when overwhelmed clashed with Sarah's need for reassurance. Her unpredictable health collided with his craving for structure. There were moments of silence that felt dangerous, moments when walking away seemed easier than staying. But there were also moments of laughter that arrived unexpectedly, moments of prayer whispered side by side, moments when hope felt less like a dream and more like a choice. What changed everything was not a confession or a kiss, but a decision. Matthew realized that love was not a feeling he waited for but an action he practiced. Sarah understood that being loved did not require perfection, only honesty. They stopped pretending without announcing it, letting reality replace performance. The labels mattered less than the commitment to show up, again and again, without guarantees. As seasons shifted, so did they. Sarah grew stronger in ways that had nothing to do with her body. Matthew found purpose beyond routine, discovering that his life had expanded simply by letting someone else matter. Faith returned to him, not as certainty, but as trust. He no longer asked for answers, only the courage to keep choosing compassion. Near the end of this story, if it has touched your heart even a little, please pause to like the video, share it with someone who believes in quiet miracles, comment your feelings, and subscribe. Your engagement tells us these stories matter, and it helps us keep telling them. The final test arrived quietly, as most real ones do. Sarah faced a setback that reminded her of her limits, and Matthew faced a choice that would change his path permanently. There was fear, and there were tears, but there was also a calm understanding that whatever came next would be faced together, not because of obligation, but because love had grown where pretending once stood. Just before the ending, we ask you to comment one word that describes how this story made you feel. Your words create a community of hearts connected by empathy. In the end, there was no dramatic declaration, no cinematic embrace under perfect lighting. There was simply two people standing in the imperfect light of ordinary life, choosing each other without pretending. What began as a favor became a foundation, and what started as a question turned into a promise neither of them had planned but both were willing to keep. And somewhere in Columbus, Ohio, under a sky that had finally cleared, kindness proved that it could become love when given enough room to breathe.